relationships are at the heart of impact. You can't really do a whole lot just working away on your own in the lab or at your desk. We need connections. You don't have unlimited resources, you don't have unlimited time. So it's really important to think about, for the life cycle of the project, who are the different types of people or organizations where your time is going to be best spent. A personal mission is trying to create a better work environment for those professional staff who are working so hard, and I think they deserve a lot better a lot of the time.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research-adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research-adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello and welcome to another episode of Research Adjacent. Chris Pahlow, my guest today, is joining us all the way from Australia. I first heard of and heard Chris through his excellent podcast Amplifying Research, and if you haven't listened to it yet, make sure you go and check it out after you finish listening to this episode, of course. Chris runs a consultancy business also called Amplifying Research, where he helps researchers think through research impact and, importantly, the relationships that underpin that impact. Chris didn't have the most conventional path into this work. He started out as an indie filmmaker and took on some teaching work to help pay the bills. This turned out to be a baptism of fire, but also the path that led him into research communications and impact. Chris and I talk about why relationships are at the heart of the work he does, how being independent can help him be honest even when it's not what people want to hear, and the often invisible work of research professional staff. Listen on to hear Chris's story. Welcome along to the Research Adjacent podcast, Chris. It is fantastic to have you here all the way from Australia. Tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Sarah, thank you very much for having me on the show. Big fan of what you're doing and the mission of championing research adjacent folks is something I'm a big believer in, and I'm looking forward to chatting about it. What do? I run a consulting company here in Melbourne, Australia called Amplifying Research. I work with academic teams, primarily focused on research centres and folks like that. And I think if I had to think of two words to sum up what my focus is, it's impact and relationships. I don't think the language the sector uses is always that helpful. Terms like comms and engagement and dissemination and science communication get thrown around a lot. And so sometimes I get put into those buckets. But the way I think about it, if someone says, hey, Chris, we want to do a podcast series to disseminate our research, or we want to hold an event, or we need to update our branding or update our website, inevitably, when we're thinking about the external audiences that researchers need to work with, whether that's practitioners, whether that's industry, whether that's the dreaded general public in quotation marks, ultimately, when we start talking about things, we end up talking about the team within the research centre or within the department or whatever it is. And it's all about relationships. I'm thinking about something Sarah Morton said, Sarah Morton from Matter of Focus, basically saying that relationships are at the heart of impact. You can't really do a whole lot just working away on your own in the lab or at your desk. We need connections. And so what I do when I'm working with researchers and academic teams, I help them think about what do they want to do, what impact do they want to contribute to, and what are the different relationships they need to build and strengthen over time to make that impact possible.
I think that sounds very much aligned with my take on things as well. And I agree that the language that we use around it is not always helpful, where I find myself talking about, I do things like communications, but that isn't really what I do. Yeah, it is, as you say, much more about people. So tell us a bit about, so you're based in Australia, and I think impact, as we said, thinking a little bit about the language, impact is a really big deal here in the UK. I'd love to hear about whether that understanding of impact in Australia is the same or whether it's slightly different, and what are the priorities there around impact?
I think we're probably still a little bit behind where things are at in the UK, but impact is becoming increasingly important if we think about things like grant applications. The government funding bodies, the big funding bodies, they do want to see some sort of evidence of impact. If they're going to be awarding taxpayers money to research projects, they want to see it. I'd like to think it's becoming more and more something that's on the radar of academics. Certainly the people that I work with regularly and the people that inspire me and even inspired me to completely change my career are the ones who are focused on impact. And yeah, I feel super grateful to be working with people like that every day.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I think what I particularly love about, I know the concept of impact, it isn't, sometimes it's a little bit of a tricky thing for people to get their head around. Sometimes it's a bit of a love-hate thing. I know here in the UK, it's all become very incentivised, which has become a little bit difficult. But the general concept of it, that it is about not just let's randomly put stuff out into the world, but thinking through really carefully who you want to reach and why you want to reach them. So tell us a bit about your process, your kind of thinking of when you're working with somebody.
That's a great question. And you've caught me at a very interesting time. If I can share a little bit about, I guess, me and my motivations, something I've been saying a lot recently is I just get really cranky sometimes. And I've ended up doing the work that I do and indeed focusing on trying to develop new ways of working and thinking about impact and thinking about the relationships academics need to have. It's just because I get too cranky and too frustrated with the way things have been done. And I can give you some specific examples at varying levels of infuriatingness. That's not even a word. Various levels that can make my blood boil or make your eyes roll. And for a long time, I was consulting specifically on academic video and podcasts, because maybe we can talk about this later, but I have a long background in the film industry. And so I ended up working with academics almost by accident. And so, yeah, people would come and say, hey, we finished our research project or we're almost finished and let's disseminate it. And then you'd be like, okay, well, it would have been nice if you came and talked to us at the start of the project, but you're here now. That's good. That's a start. Let's talk about...
That's such a recurring theme.
I know. And look, the thing is, everyone's trying their best. So there's a I hope, a happy ending to this story. Yeah. Certainly, I'm very optimistic, but people would come and they know they need to do something with their research, whether it is because on a personal level they have an impact-driven mission, or whether it's just because the incentives are changing, as you say. But then you'd start to ask some questions about, do you have any behavioral goals? Do you want people to change what they do? Do you want people to change their beliefs? And who? What type of people do you need to be engaging? And sometimes they would say, I don't know, I didn't think about that. And sometimes they would give you a very long list of my grandma, every person in the village I grew up in, scientists, you people in space, alien, the general public, like I was saying before, right? And again, I don't put any blame on any of them. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot the last few years. I just don't think there's been nearly enough support. Certainly not what I've experienced here in Australia. I'm keen to hear what it's like in your experience over in the UK. But I just saw so many researchers doing incredible stuff in all sorts of fields, and some of it very moving. I felt really humbled to be just sitting in on some of the meetings where they're dedicating their life to really trying to make a positive difference. And it just didn't seem like they were getting the support they needed to drive that impact. And the longer I got to work with people like that and was kicking around the universities here in Melbourne, it just seemed like there are some big structural issues. And on the one hand, universities are trying to take lessons from industry, whether that's something like the film industry or podcasting is increasingly big in the academic world now. So whether trying to take lessons from those kind of folks, or whether it's from consulting firms, or whether it's from advertising and marketing, there's a lot of great stuff there, but the way it's applied, in my opinion, in the academic world, really has a lot of gaps. And so that's what I'm trying to tackle now. And so to go back to your question of what's my approach when it comes to helping people think about who they work with, this is hot off the presses. I haven't even published it on my website yet, but I feel like people need to prioritize. That's a really big thing. I understand your work is super important and you're dedicating your life or a huge part of your life to it, but you don't have unlimited resources. You don't have unlimited time. So it's really important to think about, for the life cycle of the project, who are the different types of people or organizations where your time is going to be best spent. And there's been some great thinking done, like Professor Mark Reed and his team developing the 3I framework, encouraging people to think about not just influence and interest, which those are two criteria that have been used for a very long time, but we also need to think about who are we potentially impacting with our work. So people have been doing great thinking about that. But I also think on top of prioritizing, we also need to do a bit of categorization and differentiation. Because in my experience on the ground working with research teams, when I'd ask them, okay, who are the stakeholders or who are the relevant parties you think are most important, we'd end up with a huge list or a huge Eisenhower matrix just with so many different names and so many different cards. And we'd look at them all and people would ask, I think, very legitimate questions of how are we supposed to choose between community members who might be affected by our work and a funding body or the faculty executive or a peak body. Like, they're just categorically different types of relationships. And what I'm trying to do at the moment is to get teams thinking about not just the dissemination or the translation or knowledge mobilization. It's really good to think about the beneficiaries or end users of the research, but you also got to think about what I'm calling ecosystem enablers. So who are the people or organizations that are going to set up your team for success? And if you're in a university, that probably is going to be decision makers in the faculty or in chancellery or something like that. It's really important that you understand the strategic priorities of the funding bodies. Increasingly, I'm talking with people who are looking for philanthropic funding or industry partnerships. So they're not just thinking about funding on a project level, but they're thinking about the future of their center or their organization. How can it last more than those first 5 years? So I guess that's just an example. Yeah, prioritization, but categorization and thinking about the fact that not all relationships are the same. They do have different purposes in the life cycle of your project or your organization or indeed your career. And I guess I'll say one other thing. I really like the word relationships because I think it has some really helpful connotations. And if we go back to my criticism of the existing language, it's very common for me to hear people say things like, oh yeah, comms is one way. I'm just going to be broadcasting out my ideas, which I think is based on a fundamental and very unhelpful misconception. And they talk about engagement is two ways. So comms is one way. I'm just going to be shouting into the void and hoping someone listens. Engagement, maybe I'll do some listening and I'll do some talking and we'll split it 50-50. But when people think about engagement, I think that can still have some pretty heavy limitations. They might think about consultation, like I'll go and do a focus group with some representatives from a community group. And it could just be a one-off or a short-term kind of situation. Whereas I think relationships suggest something that's ongoing, something that's reciprocal, something that requires investment and even like love and care from all parties. And I think those things are all really important, I guess, just for life and just for being a person, but especially if you really do want your work to have lasting impact.
Yeah, I think it's so true. I think when you say they're shouting into the void, there's many a research communication thing I've seen that it just felt like that. It's just, yeah, we've got some money, we're just going to create this thing and then we don't quite know what we're going to do with it. I think it's so interesting is always when it's a tagged on part of the research, there's always that people always say, oh, I haven't got the time. Whereas if you think about it as just an integral part of how the research is done, as you say, not just thinking about it as like a one-off thing, but like an ongoing relationship that runs all the way through, that's just threaded through everything that you do. And then in those cases, you are going to have considerably more impact than chucking thousands of pounds at an animation that you're going to post once on social media and then it's going to disappear without trace. And actually, so much of that impact really is about the difference that we make to people, isn't it?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be so happy. I'd be overjoyed if anyone listening who's a researcher, I know Sarah, we're probably preaching to the choir here because it is.
I think probably the people who listen to this. Yeah.
I guess what I'd love to see in the future is if folks working in research organizations could just take one day a quarter and just take stock of where are your current relationships at, the important ones, and just do a bit of thinking about what relationships might be most important next quarter. If we could just do that 4 times a year, I think that would already make a big difference.
Yeah. Well, maybe you're giving yourself something to organise there, to kind of online little retreat thing. Yeah, get people to come and talk about it. I think, as you say, I think most of our audience for this podcast will be on board with you. But yeah, maybe if that message, even if people, I think sometimes I find with this podcast, even if it just helps people feel that they're not alone, I think that can be really helpful. And even if the conversations they're having are challenging, know that other people are facing the same challenges, I think can be really helpful. So you've hinted there that this isn't a world that you've always worked in. You came from a very different background. Tell us a bit about how you've ended up doing what you're doing now, what you did before.
It's a pretty long and unusual story. I imagine I'm probably quite far from the average listener of this podcast. I imagine a lot of them, like yourself, probably went and did PhDs and had this period where they were considering, are they going to continue on the academic path or are they going to do something research adjacent? That's not my story. I didn't even go to film school. I went to art school. So I'm really coming at it from a different angle. And there's a lot of little steps in my journey, which at the time just seemed like really strange, almost random, and at times really frustrating kind of things. And only now I look back and be like, oh, they all make sense now. They all contributed. And so one of the things that happened when I was doing my Bachelor of Creative Arts here in Melbourne was the university very kindly decided to delete the degree when I was halfway finished it.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I know. It's great. I know. But it meant I did a bunch of philosophy subjects just from the arts faculty and really enjoyed that and got along with one of my lecturers really well. And at the time, I was pursuing being a screenwriter and director, and I was already working on a bunch of short films and documentaries and having some pretty good success in festivals and stuff like that. And so I just needed some money to live while I made independent films, because if anyone listening knows anything about the film industry, it's a terrible way to make any kind of living. And I thought teaching would be fun, and I thought it'd be something I would enjoy. So I just asked one of my philosophy lecturers, like, hey, can I come work for you as a tutor? And he's, no, I don't need anyone, but I just got offered this job at another university. I don't think you're qualified, but why don't you just give them a call and see? And I wasn't qualified. It was teaching a master's course in a graduate school of business, and the subject was critical thinking and communication.
Oh, wow.
So I'd only really done continental philosophy. I hadn't studied any formal logic or anything, but you know what it's like in university. Sometimes they just need someone to start next week, and if you show up at the right time, they'll give you a job.
You're just the one that's there.
And so I went in and had my interview, and they're like, okay, great. Have you read these books on the reading list? And I'm like, no, but I certainly could read them. Like, terrific. Go to this tute now. You can watch what this tutor does, and then you can do it tomorrow. And that's already strange enough as my kind of induction into the academic world. But then I went to the tute, and teaching it is now my friend Ashley Barnett. And he starts the class pretty normally, talking about what critical thinking is. And then he starts doing magic tricks. He's like literally like pulling things out of his sleeves and making things appear behind people's ears. And I'm like, looking around, am I supposed to learn how to do magic to teach this class? And no, that wasn't the expectation. He just happened to be an academic who was like a magician in his part-time, and he was like an exceptionally good teacher. But if I look back at that, was a real baptism of fire. But it's really paid off, because so much of what I've done over the last few years has been challenging folks to think about different ways of communicating stuff and not just going to the obvious kind of situation. And I did that for about 6.5 years. And then I taught at another couple of unis in their film schools, which made a lot more sense at the time when I was making my first movie. And yeah, like I said, the film industry is a terrible way to make money. So I just kept hanging around universities and eventually got asked to consult at the University of Melbourne on a bunch of different media projects, and I worked off and on with them for a very long time. And it was some of those situations I described before, seeing just how hard researchers were trying and how big their impact goals were. And again, I just didn't feel like the structures were set up to help them. And I felt like I was getting involved too late. Like I said, it might be the end of a project, but even the fact that I was consulting with a video and media team and kind of like you said, it's good to think about who your audience is and what you want them to do differently before you spend all that money on an animation or a podcast or whatever it is. And I found myself in the very awkward position of the video and media team at this university would say, hey, Chris, can you come and take a look at these podcast projects or these video projects? And we want to know what you think about it and what you think they should do. And I'd have to say, I don't think they should make a video, or I don't think they should make a podcast. And eventually that led me to basically just consulting on comms strategy. And then the more I work with these organizations, like I said at the start of the episode, very often it would be like, yeah, great, let's communicate with your external audiences. But right now, you've got a team of amazing people who don't even know what each other do. And they don't know how to talk about their work in the same way. They have potentially fundamental disagreements about what they're doing and how they should talk and think about it. This is, I think, probably particularly challenging when we talk about interdisciplinary research. But I guess a long story, hopefully there was some lulls along the way, but yeah, a long, strange journey of going from teaching in universities when I probably shouldn't to working on podcasts and movies to, eventually like consulting on research strategy, particularly about stakeholders.
Yeah, that is a very unusual and very interesting journey. But you are reminding me of, I've certainly been the person in the room where I've just gone, no, you really shouldn't be spending your money on this thing. And that is quite a brave thing to do sometimes, especially when it's potentially like putting you out of a job. I've certainly been there, but when you think, that this is the right thing to do, how do you approach situations like that?
You're right, it is hard. And there's definitely been a lot of emotions over the years, particularly in the early years when I was finding my feet with this stuff. I used to joke, it's lucky that I'm a consultant because I can just throw a hand grenade into the room. And if people don't like what I say, I just don't have to show up to the office for a few days because I don't work here. And I'm joking, but I do think that's actually been a bit of a superpower. Like I'm thinking of one particular meeting where a project had really gone off the rails. It was like 6 months overdue. All the stuff that can happen in any big organization, like staff have changed and the brief's been changed 5 times and everyone's trying their best, but the circumstance is just not really working. And I could go into the call and say, hey, this project's not working. We need to finish it. These are the things we need to do. And if we can't do that, I think we just need to stop and start again from scratch. And that was quite a shocking thing for someone to say when there's been, I'm struggling to remember from my critical thinking days, the sunk cost bias. That's what I'm trying to think of.
Sunk cost fallacy.
Everyone's been working on it for so long. They've invested so much time and money and energy, but it's just not working. And if we keep going, they're just throwing good money after bad. And I realized when I said that, I was the only one on the call who could say that. And the senior manager, she paused for a moment and she looked at me and she said, you don't work for the university, do you? And I was like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
And I found, even though those moments were scary and there were times I was like, oh, that's it, I'm getting kicked off that project now. I think people trusted that I was being honest because, I think it is scary. And I don't know, I just couldn't sleep at night if I just went along with this stuff. And like I said, I just got too cranky. And if I wanted an easier life, I wouldn't be doing any of the things I'm doing, but I can't bear the frustration sometimes, Sarah. We got to do something about this.
Oh, I can completely relate to that. And I think, again, I do think it is powerful. I don't think I could have made this podcast and said some of the things I've said if I had been employed in an organization. So it can be a very powerful place to be. Power that needs to be used with responsibility, as you say, when doing it when you feel it's the right thing.
Yeah. And I don't want us to just be congratulating ourselves too much. But like I said at the start, I really do believe in your mission. And I think what you're doing is really important because while I could make a joke and say, I'll just not turn up to the office for a few days because I don't work here, everybody else still did work there. And it really made me upset to see how often professional staff in universities were treated like second-class citizens and bossed around. And a big part of my mission is trying to help amazing researchers drive impact. But a secondary mission, a personal mission, is trying to create a better work environment for those professional staff who are working so hard. And I think they deserve a lot better a lot of the time.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think, well, perhaps that nicely leads us on to a question I like to ask all of my guests, which is, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about this world that you work in?
The whole world or just the academic world?
Just your little research impact little corner, although it can be something connected, but it's your choice. If money and time were no object.
I mean, there's a million things, but something that's, I think, a personal bugbear. I think the academic world needs to put a lot more money into what would come under professional staff or professional services. I'm biased because most of what I have done over the years has been communication related, but I've just been in too many meetings where the leaders of a department or a center are saying, like, we don't understand what's wrong with our operations, or why does it take so long to get anything done? And I have to point out again and again, this is a multi-million-dollar operation you're running here. And if we looked at a commercial business who had the same yearly revenue, they would have, it's not even a comparison. I don't know, 10x, 100x in terms of the spend and amount of staff they'd have working on things like marketing and sales and all that kind of stuff. And so I feel like it's just a lose-lose situation. It's bad for academics because they get frustrated. And it's also not fair to the professional staff who are working so hard and they're trying to do 5 people's jobs and they're not getting paid enough.
Yeah, and I think that is very much what we're about, is just making it apparent, this work that is being done. Because I think so often it is invisible unless there's a problem. And if there's a problem, suddenly it explodes. And I think also that really genuinely valuing the professional staff who work in these organisations is the secret to almost everything. So when academics are saying, oh, we're too busy and we can't, and now you expect us to do all this other stuff on top of our jobs, it's like, well, no, we don't necessarily expect you to do it. You could put other people in place who can do these other things that feel like it's another demand on your time. And so I think the secret to making things better is bridging that divide between this kind of sense of academic and professional staff, researchers, whatever you want to call them, and thinking about how we can get them working together, because that's what they're doing. They're all working together for a shared aim, but at the moment doing it in very different ways.
And look, I empathize. Like, I know things are hard. I know the structures aren't set up to make what I'm suggesting easy. And a lot of people would say it's not even possible, but I guess it's the magic wand question. And I hope if we have this conversation again in 10 or 20 years, I really hope things have started to shift.
Yeah, me too. Saying then that we haven't really talked about this, but we're saying what you can say on this podcast, part of the reason we're thinking about that is because you have a podcast as well, don't you? So would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about your podcast and where they can find it, the sorts of things you cover?
I'd love to. So the pod is called Amplifying Research, just like my company. And I have the great pleasure of talking to amazing people from all around the world, people who are passionate about impact. And we talk about how research organizations can communicate more effectively, how they can engage more effectively, and how they can collaborate more effectively. Incredible guests, like people talking about how can you co-design research projects with different communities, people talking about stuff more like what we've been talking about. How can you work in comms or engagement and embed the right kind of approach in your center? Yeah, I feel really grateful just to get to talk to super, super cool people who, they're trying to share everything they've worked on and all the knowledge they've got with the world. So check it out. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just type in Amplifying Research.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it for anybody who is in this kind of comms, engagement, impact kind of space. You've had some fantastic guests on and really talking about this, more the strategic piece, isn't it? It's the whys and wherefores of doing things better. So yeah, definitely recommended. And if people want to get in touch with you personally or find out more about your company, where would you have them go and look?
You can find me on amplifyingresearch.com. or just come look me up on LinkedIn and shoot me a message. Yeah, very happy to have a chat. If you care about impact and any of the things we've talked about, very happy to have a chat.
Fantastic. So it just remains to say thank you so much for coming along and sharing what you do and sharing your story.
Sarah, thank you very much for having me. Again, huge fan, and it's like an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind. Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links in the episode description to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and the theme music is by Lemon Music Studios on Pixabay. And you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.